Well, hello everyone. I'm Shepherd Farrar and I chair programming for the NACD Capital Area Chapter. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Board Governance in the Face of the Unexpected. First, a couple of housekeeping items. Please do remain muted throughout the program and use the chat function to pose your questions. No need to wait until the end. You're welcome to put questions in the chat box at any time. We'll be monitoring that and interspersing questions as they come up. Next, we know that many of you want to receive credits for this program. In order to get credits, please make sure that your name is fully shown, your first and last name, and do introduce yourselves from where you're coming in. Finally, NACD and the NACD Chapter Network organizations are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations dedicated to providing directors with the opportunity to discuss timely governance oversight practices. The views of the speakers and audience are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of NACD. I would like to thank our two chapter sponsors. If you could change the slide, please. The continued loyalty of these organizations underscores the important role of NACD, and their support helps us to fulfill our mission of delivering world-class, director-centric programming and peer-to-peer sharing of insights that are vital to advancing excellence in the boardroom. Next slide, please. Today, we'd like to highlight a special premier partner, KPMG, who has continued to support our mission of excellent corporate governance. Thank you so much for your support. And next, I'd like to take a minute to welcome our first-time attendees here. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoy your first program and join many more NACD events. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Steve Barth. Steve is a senior partner at Foley and Lardner and is a frequent speaker on corporate governance matters. Steve, thank you for moderating today's panel.
Thank you, Shepherd. I am thrilled to be here and really excited to introduce a truly impressive panel. First, we have Bruce Crawford. Bruce is a board member, C-suite advisor, and retired Army Lieutenant General. So when Bruce says something, we snap to attention and we mean it. Mosgan Lefebvre is an executive vice president, chief technology and operations officer at the Travelers Company. And Ellen Zane, many of you know, is the CEO emeritus and founding chair at Tufts Medical Center. So thanks all for joining today, and I know we're going to have a really interactive and interesting discussion. So let me set up the framework for everybody. First of all, despite extensive ERM planning, boards nonetheless continued to be surprised by unexpected events and situations and circumstances. So our focus today is going to be how can you and your board be better prepared for the unexpected? And then when it occurs, how can you be better prepared to respond to such circumstances? Our whole goal here is for you to avoid being part of the dreaded headline, "Where was the board when all this happened?" The board was asleep at the switch. Those headlines, and they happen, should send shivers down your spine because they do to me. So with that focus in mind and with that intention, our panelists are going to be focused on trying to provide you some real practical takeaways to help you and your boards be better prepared to anticipate surprises and then to respond to them. So with that, let's get going here. And Bruce, I'm going to have you start. Beyond these normal ERM reviews, what more can a board do and management do to get prepared for and to predict the unpredictable?
Steve, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to share a few thoughts. And I just wanted to correct you on one thing. Even when I was in the Army, nobody snapped too. So,
well, we do here.
I just wanted to make sure I corrected that. But no, thank you for your time. I think it's a very timely subject. I think we're at a place now, and this is just my opinion, where everything becomes a crisis if you're not prepared. Even the most minute things, if there's no preparation, if you don't have processes in place. And we'll talk a little bit about a couple other things that I believe we need to have in place, and then everything becomes a crisis. So in terms of what are some of the best practices, I think you're going to hear this word 100 times today, and that's the word culture. And what I'm going to add to it, though, in this particular case, I think it requires a disciplined board culture. And so what do I mean by that? So there are cool and interesting things, obviously, that boards get briefed on. They normally have to do with, quarterly financials, et cetera, performance. But when I talk about a disciplined board culture and the importance of that, I think you got to resist the temptation to be solely focused on the here and now, because that's what you're seeing, all the time. You're seeing it, monthly, sometimes a couple of times monthly in committees, when you actually meet at boards, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this idea of a disciplined board culture, obviously, is not a new thing, but it's easy to talk about. It's very, very difficult to achieve it. I personally believe that, and I've seen, successes where highly functioning boards focus, about 70, to 80% of their time on the future, vice the here and now. I think that's kind of one thing that I'd recommend. If I could add another, the competitive landscape when it comes to risk. And I know we're trying to, we get the fact that, having a good ERM process matters. I got that. But what I've found is a lot of times you're being briefed on risk, but you don't really have the depth, really understand the depth and scope of that risk. And you haven't taken the next steps required to actually mitigate those risks. And by mitigating those risks, I don't mean just putting policy in place. I mean the other things, making sure that resources, are applied to them, et cetera, et cetera. And so if I could add any other thing, I know that there's been some discussion about tabletop exercises. I'm a huge fan of tabletop exercises. But a couple of things about tabletops that I've found, seen some people be more successful than others. So a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, do them. They bring out an outside entity and they have a great tabletop exercise. But one, they don't have the right people in the room. All right. When they conduct the tabletop exercise, if you don't have what I call the critical enablers in every organization, you don't have HR there, you don't have your marketing and communications team there, you don't have the right people from your legal team there, then you're not going to have the repetition and the practice required to really, really be successful when there's an event. When those same people have to actually react. And so those are just a couple of things. But if there's any stomper here from me, it's this whole idea of having a disciplined board culture, which is super hard to get to in an organization.
Ellen, can you weigh in?
I can, thank you. And thanks to all of you at NACD for inviting us. I utterly agree with Bruce on the issue of culture. I think we all underestimate the importance of culture in the workplace and at a board. And a trusting culture is what's so important. And what's one of the major jobs we all have, and that is hiring the CEO, firing the CEO, and understanding who the management team is. So feeling that we have enough exposure beyond the CEO so that we are very comfortable with all the key players who can give us a heads up at the right time is incredibly important. And that culture of trust based on past practices is hugely important. I actually had the excellent opportunity to participate in this kind of a discussion just yesterday at a board meeting I was at for a very large company. And one of the things I found fascinating was in the enterprise risk management process, in the ERM process, rather than just looking at the 10 items that were the top 10, we looked at the ones that had increased in the top 10 they've been over the last year, and the ones that fell off the list over the last year. And I found that to be hugely helpful because what the discussion around that unearthed why things had increased, why things had fallen off. And it gave us much more of a sense and a base for the things that we ought to be thinking about. So I have to say, in the kind of sort of normal ERM process, dissecting that a little more deeply than we all do and looking at the differences between what the board ranked as the top 10 issues and what management ranked as the top 10 issues was also a very interesting part of this. And I'd say to close out is the whole issue of reputational risk is something, the whole point of this discussion is so that boards and directors don't get surprised. And the whole idea is to think proactively about what it is that could come out of left field and potentially affect us reputationally. And I think as we go through the time during this segment, we'll be able to give some examples of that along the way as well.
Thanks, Ellen. Mojgan, what do you think?
Great. Well, thank you for having me here. And it's, everything that Bruce and Ellen said, like I would say right on. I'll answer it from both, my role as a board member and also in my operating role as chief technology, especially on the technology officer side, I would say, and not just at my current company, but I've worked for regulated industries, both on the biomedical and now for the past 15 in insurance. I'd say there's a lot of things that you learn. And so I would say, the best readiness is practice as opposed to theory. And, when I think back to like the examples where I learned most kind of to what Bruce was saying, it's really regular. And I say regular, like not once once every 2 or 3 years, but regular crisis simulation. And I take it a step further than tabletop only. I would say what you can call a war game, meaning like truly, like in some cases, actually with the knowledge perhaps of the executive who's owner of an area where you're going to be simulating this, have it be where not everybody knows that this is a simulation.
Right.
And it's awkward for sure, but frankly, that's when the truth hits the fan and you'll learn a lot from it. So everything from gaps in your decision flow, communication, your escalation processes, and then it truly exposes that. And the goal is from every single one of them to learn and continue to make your actual plan better. So mapping out hidden dependencies, I would say like one area where there is in today's world a lot of potential risk is all of the dependencies that exist with suppliers. Again, whether it's where you buy your software and other things or where you've got services that you've outsourced. Again, understanding that to the third, fourth, and even sometimes fifth party risk, because again, everybody's dependent on everybody. And many of you probably were aware of the AWS outage that happened just in the past several weeks. And so even with some of our vendors who have their platform on Microsoft's Azure, there was still dependencies on the Amazon Web Services. So it's incredible what you actually get out of when these real crises, so to speak, happen. And then again, this was referenced like that outside perspective for sure to challenge the assumptions are important, like whether it's red teams internally or externally, cyber experts, economists. Sometimes even there are companies who bring in like creative thinkers who can imagine extreme scenarios. I don't know if any of you saw the Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, who was on 60 Minutes, and they talked about the fact that internally, I mean, they've got like psychologists who work at the company, they've got people who are like designing the worst scenarios, and really, again, all of that towards finding out where the gaps are. And then I'd say, last but certainly not least, continuous board literacy is absolutely critical. I don't think anyone can be an expert in all areas, but you absolutely have to continue to educate yourself about emerging technologies. I think some level of understanding of the risks of how AI is leveraged and how it can be abused, and data and the risk of data that's not meant to be exposed now being far more exposable, so to speak, through generative AI. I mean, these are all things that boards should be paying attention to. So really nothing beats live drills more than something that is, that's as close as possible to reality.
So in your experience, this is for all three of you, how best to run those crisis planning war games or desktop scenarios? Should they be initiated by the chair of your risk committee, your audit committee, or should they be coordinated? Should people know about it, not know about it? What's your guys' view on what's most effective?
All of the above.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
As unpredictable, like again, it's like the less predictable they are, the better. And even if everyone knows about it, not that everyone shouldn't know all the details to come in fully prepared as opposed to when it happens in real life.
So if some of our attendees are chairs of risk committees or audit committees that oversee risk, would you recommend that and I think you probably have to coordinate this with the CEO, right?
Yeah.
But you say, look, I'd like to run a simulated, crisis response scenario. Here's what I'm thinking. We're going to bring in, you tell me an outside expert to here's the scenario, and then you go ahead and execute on that strategy. Is that something you would recommend? Or how would you tweak it?
I kind of like so the process is there for us all to learn, and sometimes we forget that. We're conducting this crisis action drill, or we're conducting this tabletop, not to get all the answers right, but to learn.
Right.
And so you got to have a good process in order for it to be a good experience for everybody. And so I kind of tend to like the crawl, walk, run. And that might sound kind of anecdotal, but look, it's okay if you've never done this before to let the management team, pick your most likely and your most disruptive, scenarios, no more than a couple. Let the management team, from a crawl perspective, design an exercise, have the board and all the enablers participate, and you grow this thing over time till you get to a point to where you've developed some muscle memory and some processes. You can change the scenario, but people generally know what to do. But if you start with something big and it's not a good experience for everybody, the learning doesn't occur. You know what I mean? It's a lumpy process. I know lumpy is not a technical term, but it's a bit of a lumpy process. So I kind of like that, especially if you've never done it. Obviously, there's experts out there that you can bring in to run it for you, but I like to start small, develop some processes out of it, and then grow it. And pretty soon, it doesn't take long. You could do one a quarter, and you've got, at the end of the year, you've got a process that you didn't have, a capability that you didn't have at your disposal, just 1 year ago. So just a thought, because they can get complicated, and you finish it and you check the box, but there's no learning that occurs.
Right.
One thing, Steve, I would also add is content familiarity with the company. So many of us sit on boards where we may or may not have a lot of content knowledge about the company. And so if something happens in Malaysia or China, the idea that we all are educated about what's going on in different locations with the company and the idiosyncratic issues that are operative in different parts of the company, in different locations. The truth is, the more content understanding we all have, the more we're capable of adding value when we weigh in. And for some of us, and I think for Mogan, it's a different story, but for some of us who consider themselves dinosaurs when it comes to technology, or some of it, this age of AI is such that we don't know what we don't know about how this can affect us in so many ways in a company. So getting us educated on particular areas that are pertinent, which that certainly is also, I think, helpful in getting boards comfortable with the idea that something is going to happen at some point.
Something as simple as having everybody's phone number available, by the way, physically, because like a lot of people have it, but then it's up in the cloud, and then when your network's down, well, you can't access it. So simple, basic things.
Yes.
Yeah.
The contact tree, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So you've all mentioned literacy or board education or training. So I mean and I totally agree. You've got to know how to block and tackle before you can run or pass. So how best to do that? What's your advice to our attendees that they can take back to their boards on how their boards can better be prepared from a literacy perspective?
I like the go ahead, Ellen, please.
I was just going to say that no question is too small. And we have to assume that, always be ready for something to come out of left field. And we have to assume that if you don't understand something, somebody else doesn't either. And I think getting over our paranoia about asking what we might believe is a stupid question, they really aren't. Most of the time, they really aren't. And feeling comfortable trying to get deeper and deeper when we're in this topic that just doesn't make a lot of sense, and being willing to do reading and have conversations offline as well is super important in all of this. So sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
No, great insights because this whole idea of being comfortable, you've got to be a little bit vulnerable also. And you got to think about who you got in the boardroom. Everybody, they get three or four other things going on, and sometimes you don't get that vulnerability exposed. But back to the trust conversation that we were having, if you've got trust and if you've got a good culture on the board, and if you've gotten to know your fellow board members, that's an much easier conversation. And that's why I was smiling while you were talking, Ellen. To the point of a best practice, though, when it comes to board education, so the board schedules are packed with stuff, all important stuff. I've seen a couple of companies at every board meeting have a special topic, and it's not rearward looking, it's forward looking. And that to me, I really liked because that's true board education. Now we know over the horizon we're going to take on this thing, or there's something out there. We need to begin a process of educating the board. And it may not happen in one meeting, but the key point being when it comes to best practices is, and this is super hard to do on board schedules with the amount of time you have, but having a special topic that's kind of outside the scope of things that are near term is a good practice when you're looking to do quote unquote board education.
And Bruce, I've seen examples where when the company management leadership goes out on innovation trips, or they go visit, whether it's existing partners or potential ones, where they're invited if
Yes.
the CEO or chair of the board decides to do so, and not everybody comes, but even if you have just a few of your board members come, like, they're getting educated at the same time as your leadership team, because frankly in today's world nobody has all the answers, and asking the right questions, as Ellen was saying, is really probably the best thing that you can do, and so that's another way.
I love it.
And of course, no better way to enhance your board literacy than to attend NACD programs, right?
Right.
All
Right.
right, Deb, send me my check now. So you all mentioned culture, board culture, company culture. It's a great word, and I think we all think we know what it means. But what does it mean? And more importantly, what happens if you don't have a good one? Ellen, you're first up on this one.
So, as I mentioned, I think we all underestimate the importance of culture in all of it. And what does it mean that as I mentioned earlier, part of it is trust in not only management, but in your fellow board members, your colleagues sitting around the table. It means being open and honest with yourself, as well as when we hear from others around the table. And it's our behavior as well, how we interact with one another by being probing, by asking deep questions, but doing in a way that's not one of those gotcha questions, or doing it in a way that doesn't feel like you're poking somebody in the eye. So it's always helpful, I think, saying what I think I heard was, or tell me if I'm wrong. Could you help me better understand? And I think a culture where people are genuinely saying, I want to understand better because I don't know everything, is a really interesting indicator on culture. When a culture is lousy, it can be incredibly toxic to a company. And we have all seen both. We've seen it when it's truly excellent, and we've seen 180 on the other side. And I will tell you the amount of time, money, and risk that goes into dealing with a disaffected board culture can be absolutely end of story for boards and for companies. So if one believes that there are cultural issues then if it isn't the lead director or the chair that's really embracing that and trying to do something about it, then we all have an obligation to bring it up.
Yes.
Because I think there's nothing more dangerous for a company than a toxic culture, either within management or between management and the board, or the board among itself.
Yeah, interesting question, Steve, on defining it. When I think about it, I think about shared values almost. So you've got this group of, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, but at some point, there's got to be some commonality with respect to kind of shared perspective, shared values, how we treat each other, et cetera. I couldn't agree with Ellen more um, on the what happens when you don't have a strong culture and a productive culture on a board. It not only affects the deliberations in the boardroom, but you got to think about it, that whole trust piece that we talked about, the management team, a lot of these folks, many of them, over time, they don't get to brief the board every week, so they put a lot of time and effort. And the last thing you want them to do, if you don't have a good board culture, and if you're not being, finding the right ways to Ellen's point, hey, make me understand this, et cetera, you could damage relations and trust with members of the management team, and so it's when I think about it, literally when I was looking at and examining like what would be a good place for me to land, I talked about culture match. I was looking to join a company when I got out of the Army 5 years ago to look for a job. When I was looking, at board opportunities, I wanted to go somewhere as you're being, the interview, where there was a good culture match for me, because that's where I thought I could be most effective. If at least it appears we share, some of the same values and how we view things. And so that's just, my thoughts on the how to define it and kind of a little bit more on what it means to me.
How did you determine if there was a culture match, Bruce?
I actually, while the interview process was going on, and I see Ellen Smile and others, they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them.
Right.
And once you get past the nom-gov committee, if they're really interested, obviously, you're going to end up talking to others in the company. And so that's when you kind of determine that. And you just kind of instinctively know. That was one of the things I was going to, in terms of advice, trust your instincts when it comes to whether there's something rotten in Denmark or not. When it comes to risk and handling crisis, and are we focused on the right things? But it was an instinctual thing. You're vibing. I'm not saying that you see the world exactly the same way. They're not that long, and the discussions aren't that long. But you kind of know when you connect. Arms are no longer folded. They're maybe here. Heads are nodding. That whole body language thing. But anyway, I look for a good culture match, because you're going to spend a lot of time together if it's a good board.
Steve, one point maybe that's helpful for folks is when you are interviewing on how you know the culture is good, is to ask to meet more people than they want you to meet, and determine if the way they talk about the challenges for the company are similar across the board. You want to make sure that everybody's singing off the same song sheet, and the fact that you ask questions that they may not have anticipated, so they can't rehearse it ahead of time either.
Yeah.
Is so when you get that kind of consistency across the people you talk with, it's a very good indicator on how strong the culture is.
Yes.
I think the healthiest cultures are really ones where people aren't hesitant to surface problems when they're not still fully baked and they're still a bit messy. So really the cadence of communication is absolutely critical. So, a CFO calling before the story is ready and is, and fully ready to be signed off. I think weak cultures wait until the issue is fully packaged, or maybe sometimes, unfortunately, as we've seen many examples, like when the press is calling. So I think it's like a question of like watching for those signals. And then as you know, as you're talking to the boards in general, like there are always, of course, all these very well prepared presentation decks, and really saying what is not in the presentation that worries you, like leveraging the opportunity to talk to the people who are there. So it's not just the kind of the practiced questions that are getting answered. And then from a timing perspective, I think in terms of like, and we all have had also the opportunity to have to communicate to the board, and you also want to make sure you're not just, communicating everything, but it should be about impact times speed. So, if it's a big problem and it's something that's going to get out fast, like you call immediately, regardless of what time. If it's slower, but like building up, like you may want to be providing daily updates. So again, the cadence of your communication matters. And then don't forget about social media. It's like absolutely part of today's risk system. So think of it as a radar, like because one viral post can totally change the trajectory of your crisis. So making sure you've got the teams as a company that are monitoring and have early responses have to absolutely be part of your plan.
Mhm.
So you've surfaced the big next part of our discussion, and that is communication. Oftentimes, as we all know, poor communication plans or skills can be much worse than the crisis itself, right? So, and Moshkin, you raised it in two different circumstances. I want to address first communication from management to the board, which you raised, and I thought you said it out very well, impact versus likelihood
Yeah.
or execution. But management teams, as many know, are very hesitant to come to their boards without a response to the invariable question that all you good board members asked, what are you going to do about it, Bruce? Right? So if I bring a problem to the board and a surprise that I wasn't ready for already as CEO or management, I'm not looking very good, right? Now, if I don't have an answer for it, I look even worse. So, how do you, and I think we may all agree that that's not the right way to think about these things and not the right way for a management team to communicate to the board. So, if you agree with me, what's the next step? How do you get management to buy into the sooner is better, even if you don't have all the answers?
Well, I think as in any leadership position, you gotta kind of model the way, right? Like if you say that your expectation is that people don't come to you when it's too late, then you gotta also show how you behave as a board when they do come to you earlier, and maybe they don't have all the answers and they haven't worked on the perfect packaging. So I think that one is that it's your reaction and truly being there as a partner, and really again your role as a board is absolutely to be a sounding board and provide advice based on the experience that you have, and to be their partner. And then I would say secondly, again, nothing beats making sure that you're as prepared as possible. Again, doing the scenario planning that we talked about, and making sure you're documenting all of that. And then some things have to be prepackaged, like some scenarios, if you've got the prepackaged communication, so to speak, where you've thought through these are the possibilities, then you can at least say, look, this sounds like a scenario, such a scenario, and this is what we would do. So again, preparation, really clarity, and like making sure who's on first, who's doing what part of the communication, all of that becomes really important. So clarity, speed, discipline, where depending on like everybody knows, from the chair of the board to the risk committee leader to the CEO, like who's on for what, and making sure that everybody's not doing everything, and the CEO isn't just like answering everybody's question, as opposed to like really leading the way in addressing the crisis.
We
That's very
all know you can't communicate enough.
Yeah.
So
right.
if we all walk into it saying boards don't like surprises, and nor should they be surprised.
Mhm.
And this is where I think either the board chair or the lead director have a very important role, setting the tone of making it safe for people to bring information forward that isn't fully baked. And I think Mo's gun was totally correct. There needs to be a sense in the boardroom that things aren't so prepared that it feels like it's baked in and rubber stamped versus making sausage in the boardroom where we're getting into the details way too far.
Yes.
So hitting that balance isn't easy. Nobody's, I think, got the silver bullet on that. But the guiding star should probably be, if I were a board member, what would I need to know and when would I need to know it? As opposed to management feeling that, well, I don't have enough of the information and I want to dot this I and cross this T before I send out a memo to the board. I would always defer to more communication more quickly is better than less.
Yeah, that's why I like the idea of board education and having time. And I know we're talking about crisis action where maybe there isn't enough time, but on some of these, projects that the company may be working on, they're trying to get the 95% solution. It's okay to have time for a special topic when it's at 50%. All right, and you're beginning to educate the board, and then maybe you have an opportunity to help them a little bit by asking some of those leading questions, early on in the process. And so, but to the broader question, the first time you shoot the messenger, then you're going to be waiting on the 95% solution.
Yeah.
That's just kind of, I think Moja made the point. You got to lead by example there, and your audio and your video have to match. You can't say one thing and do another. So.
Oh, I love that quote.
I like the quote too.
Audio, video.
That's one takeaway. So everybody write that down.
Yeah, I wish I'd have been smart enough to come up with it, but I heard it, 20 years ago, and I just kind of stuck.
Now with AI, the audio and video can mismatch.
So the communication between management and the board is one thing, but now what about to outside constituencies? And what role should the board have in making sure that that is well thought out, well done, and doesn't actually do more damage than the actual crisis? This is an area that many companies fail in, by the way. So, Bruce, start with you.
I kind of take it, and the approach I take is make a friend before you need a friend. In terms of
You're hot today, Bruce. My gosh, here's another one.
No, I just I have this problem of actually saying what I'm thinking for some reason. But when I think about this question, it's so obviously nobody likes surprises. But if you don't, so you know who your constituents are, external to the company, and cultivating those relationships, just like we talk about the board culture, that external culture and that external kind of approach to developing relationships, shareholders, investors, people who are really, really interested in the thing that just went wrong. I've seen some who are very artful in how they do that, and it's authentic. It's not just, hey, look, let's just get together and do a few things. It's very authentic because what you're setting conditions for is when something goes wrong, and we're going to have to communicate, and I'm not going to have all of the information, and that first report's almost always wrong, and so there's a little bit of trust there that's developed, and a little bit more patience if you've kind of cultivated those external relationships as a board member with shareholders and investors or whomever it happens to be that's going to receive the information. The only other thing I'll tell you is, so we've talked a lot about communicating, and we've talked about the external communications. Boy, that internal communications to the workforce is super important, because what happens absent information, people start touching things and pushing buttons, and things change right there in the organization. So just a little bit of thought on the external piece, and
I'm
respect to making
multitasking. I am going to play as a single. They have my club. I'm going to walk. You have a push.
Uh-oh.
and cultivating.
What do we do in the unexpected event that somebody interrupts us?
Yeah, but cultivating those, establishing those external relationships before you need them is the point that I'm trying to make.
That's great. Ellen, I know you have strong
I
views on
would
this.
love to reinforce what Bruce just said. I can't think of a better answer than that. The whole idea of communicating with analysts, with your shareholders, If you sit on a board where there's paranoia about board members participating in those kinds of conversations, and board members should not be freelancing and they should not be cowboys in all of this. But having said that, there should be opportunities so that you can develop credibility and trust with your shareholders and the analysts on Wall Street in the good times, so that they're there and they trust what you have to say and what you're telling them in the bad times. The difficult thing on public companies is how much we can't say. So as a result, and they know it. They all know there's certain things, even though they probe, they know there's certain things that we can't say. And it's very cathartic to be able to say, I can't say that. But if they trust you, then they know that you've got your arms around it, you're managing it, that the board and management are all over it. So working with external parties who are your major constituents during the good times helps during the bad.
And again, having like a very well flushed out communication plan and who are the stakeholders, in what order, who's in
Yes.
charge of communicating with which group, and and then there are companies, of course, who provide expert guidance on what to think about and what others have as best practices in your industry. And I'd say, transparency and really, again, your culture should guide a lot of it. More communication, as Alan said, and Bruce also pointed out to culture. So I think they're all connected. All these points are very, very connected.
And when you start to get to, so obviously there are different types of incidents that require you to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And as a board, I've seen, this done differently. I'll use cybersecurity breaches as an example. You should have, as a board, some predetermined kind of thresholds for when you want to be notified, as a board that's been an incident. And it could range from, something very small to, something big. But the point being, to Mojan's point earlier, predetermined, like you're not surprised. By these, or you're not surprised when this thing happened, but they didn't notify the board because you'd already agreed, look, for something like that, you don't have to notify us. But once it crosses this threshold, we absolutely want to be notified. And so you can determine what those variables in the equation are and what the thresholds are. But I just wanted to kind of comment on that because it does need to be predetermined and agreed upon.
Sometimes a helpful hint sometimes is, for most boards, there's a very good plan in place for an emergency CEO issue. So it's the old hit by a truck issue. And there's oftentimes a piece of paper that outlines what the call cadence is of who gets informed when. And that's a good starting place to look at how to begin the communication cadence. But having thought it through, whether it's the head of audit, the head of risk, the whole board, we should think those things through about who gets called first, second, and third. It is a very helpful and will give us each peace of mind to know someone's in charge and everyone knows what's going to happen and when it's going to happen.
So Mojgan, you raised that scary two words, social media. So how does a company make sure that social media impacts don't overwhelm the message?
So again, having absolutely like teams, whether it's in your marketing organization or elsewhere, who are fully monitoring. So the monitoring of all of your channels becomes absolutely critical. And then again, having protocols around responding, and there will be ones that you know from before, and the protocols are there. If there are more complicated ones, again, making sure that you address them head on, and then knowing who's in charge of doing that. And again, it's got to be aligned to your culture. And I really think a lot of times your response probably is more important than the actual crisis, because a lot of times we've seen the same kind of thing happen to different companies, but how they handled it, how transparent they were, how the timing of the communication was done, all of those at the end were what people remembered that company by, as opposed to the actual crisis and why did that crisis occur. And I'd say, again, the same holds true for social media channels, where it could be your customer, or it could be a prospect, or it could be a fake, by the way, right? Like, because now there are robots, like hundreds, if not thousands, running in the background. And so you need to invest in these things. These are, like, no longer emerging. These are actual risks that exist, and there are plenty of examples of them out there.
How does the board make sure that a company has good protocols in place to, manage the social media channels?
I think it's about, again, making sure that those are one of the things that you review, and you've got to trust your management team, and ask them. Again, you got to make sure that you ask about all of these elements, and as part of their communication strategy and overall set of protocols, that should be one of the areas that you ask and discuss. And if they don't, then at least guide them on what you might have seen.
So time for crystal ball time. Okay, we've all given our thoughts and ideas on how boards should prepare for the unexpected, how they should respond. So, as you think about the future, what's next? What should boards be thinking about? Are the next surprises that they may have to address in the near-term future?
Maybe
Every board meeting I go to, there are two major issues there are lots of issues, but there are two that jump out. One is AI and what it is and is not going to do, and how are we going to know when we have success or failure in an initiative relative to it. And the second is geopolitical. Lots and lots of, especially for global companies, geopolitical risks, and being able to war game that is important, because we're all doing business all around the world, and we have workforces all over the world. And it's incredibly important to understand what's brewing in each region of the world so that we can anticipate what we would do in a crisis.
So yeah, I 100% AI. And again, it's not like we don't hear about it and we aren't aware of the potential risks. So it's not about the fact that we didn't see it coming. I think, unfortunately, like, are you taking it seriously enough? And the signals are in front of us. Like, how are you planning around it? I saw a question in the chat around, AI strategy and so on. And so I'd say, well, a couple of things. One is, when I think of AI strategy, like any other strategy, I would say at least a first review of what the AI strategy is important. But then I think the risks, like, again, understanding the risks, like any other core topic that can change, the trajectory of risks in general. So making sure you have a framework for thinking about AI risks, which will be dependent on what your strategy and implementation in the company is. And then that should become something that at least the risk committee, wherever that, whatever committee that is, whether it's its own independent or part of audit or other, that committee is looking at those risks and understanding how they're being thought about, and what the company is doing to be prepared for those risks. Because kind of like cyber, when we say it's not about if, it's about when, you should think about all of these things that, what if it were to happen, what would we do?
On the artificial intelligence front, a recommendation I would give. So first and foremost, every company, when you look behind the curtain, it's almost a technology company. It doesn't matter what it is they make. They're generating data. They have enterprise, cybersecurity risks, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to artificial intelligence, I would say pick one, not five. Yeah. If you don't have an AI strategy, but pick one hard problem in your business that you believe an aspect of artificial intelligence can help you solve. And then get some learnings around that. And then begin to try and scale that across your business. Because there's AI anxiety out there now. Among board members, they're all talking, what AI initiatives do we have? What's our AI strategy? Every company, I guarantee you, has some artificial intelligence related initiative ongoing, in a cubicle somewhere that just hadn't become visible to the board. And so from a board perspective, the recommendation I would give is pick one hard problem, all right, and get the right people working on it. But let's look at that, take that perspective, and then grow that over time instead of you're trying to do, you got 10 AI initiatives ongoing, you're spending a ton of money on those AI initiatives, and you have no idea as to whether or not these are going to be things that you can scale, internal or external to the business. The only other surprise, on the crystal ball side, it's actually, it's almost a blinding flash of the obvious, but I pay very close attention to complacency. All right. Especially within companies that have been, I'll call it mildly successful, because out of complacency comes a risk averse culture, the C word again. And out of that comes missed opportunities. And so obviously, everything that Ellen said, everything that Mogen said, I agree. The geopolitical piece of this is fascinating now as you wake up every day and things are ebbing and flowing. But I'm trying to take a little bit more nuanced approach to it because I thought about the question, and it's complacency because of what happens when you become complacent, almost risk averse, and then you miss opportunities and wake up one day wondering why you've lost so much market share. So anyway.
As a board member, how do you make that decision that you think your company is too complacent?
I think I heard a simple answer given early. You ask, you see signals. Again, it's back to there. So there's the board culture piece, but you've got instincts that say, we're not bold enough, with our strategy. These initiatives are lagging, not leading. It doesn't take long to tell if you've got a risk averse, at least from what I've seen, a risk averse kind of culture, in the company. And I've just seen that lead to, it's not just about resting on your laurels, but I'm more concerned about the missed opportunities. But to your question, Steve, and it's a great question, you get signals, which mean if you're involved to the point to where, you've got your sensors in figuratively in the right places in the company.
A lot of it is our judgment and how we're able to read the environment. A really good example these days is China. I sit on a board of a company that is doubling down in China and is not afraid of working in China and has a very, very thoughtful strategy on what to do and what not to do. Other boards are like, how can we dilute our impact from China? And how can we get out of China and how fast can we get out of there, especially with all the, and what does that tell you? There's one board is way more bold than the other one is much more risk averse. And the question is, let's ask, what do you fear? What is the things that you fear the most? And what could we possibly do about it before we make a sweeping decision to get out of China? Or to actually do more, build another building in China or whatever. So it right now, it's a good example of the geopolitical issues, but there's a lot of chatter about something like that, like China and different parts of the world going on right now.
And maybe one area that I think about a lot is talent, because again, with AI changing the way we work, it's all coming down to the people and the worker, and what does that mean from a talent perspective, and that's going to be shifting faster than we could ever imagine. So, and it's not just about losing all your people, but it's about, do you have like gaping capability gaps where the business strategy needs to evolve faster than the skills that you have in your company are able to handle it, whether it's around AI or hybrid work or all the new generational kind of expectations, and what should your talent look like, and what's your succession plan? Do you have a succession planning gap? Do you have a learning velocity gap? So I think all of those are absolutely critical. And how do you prepare for them? I would say, like, not treating them as emerging risk, but again, going back to the ongoing readiness exercise, meaning how are you embedding these risks in your scenario planning, into your review of your strategy? and again to the signals, early having kind of a view into the signals that actually have some form of measurement of each of those elements for you.
How about the age-old now issue of cyber breaches and how boards should best prepare for the inevitable?
I have a really good example on a cyber breach that I think our audience might appreciate. I was not on this board. This is a colleague of mine who experienced this very, very large consumer company and whose name we would all know. And they had a huge breach. And the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts wanted the company to inform all the affected people, and there were hundreds of millions of people who were affected by this breach immediately, so that they knew that their information had been compromised. The FBI did not. The FBI came to the company and said, "We don't want you to tell anybody this happened because we want to go silent to catch the bad guys." So here is a board sitting there with the Attorney General telling them one thing and the FBI telling them another. Now, tell me if anyone in our audience can prepare for that curveball coming out of left field.
Yeah.
And it's the type of thing where the board had to sit around and look at the upside and the downside for their consumers, for their shareholders, of which route to take. And by the way, they sided with the Attorney General. I think they all didn't want to go to jail. I think that was a lot of it. But isn't that an interesting,
Yes.
it's a true example of what really happened, where a board was put smack in the middle of two incredible regulatory authorities and had to make a decision. So there's nothing like a real example to help bring it all home.
Oh, yeah. That's a real one. That's a real one. On the cybersecurity front, again, there's no magic bean. You've got to be able to do the basic blocking and tackling. Basic blocking and tackling costs money. It costs you, tech dollars. It costs you talent dollars, et cetera. And so, a lot of companies, they're doing some of the cool and interesting things, but they've got holes in their swing when it comes to basic blocking and tackling in the company. And as given how connected things are, it only takes one. If you just do the research, people like to come up. Why are we still fishing? What about the cool stuff? Why are we still doing all these fishing drills? Because they work 70% of the time. Or you can trace many intrusions back to some type of phishing related note that was sent out. And so there's a lot of mental capacity for the really big things when it comes to cybersecurity. And we've talked about some of them here, but I highly recommend as board members that when you're taking the brief, number one, if you're only getting that brief from the CISO once a year, that's a problem. And it says a lot about the company. Technology and cyber committee. So one of the things I had an opportunity to do was one of the CEOs said, "Look, I've got cybersecurity where it is in audit. There's an audit connection. But what I want to do is I want to create a tech and cyber committee. And Crawford, I want you to chair that committee." And so now our board every quarter is briefed by the CISO, the CTO, and the CIO. And it's not a long brief, but we're reviewing, we've got some cadence now, so they kind of understand it. So that's a technique, that could be used so that you get visibility of the, kind of cybersecurity related risk on a more regular basis, vice the 70, slide PowerPoint brief once a year when some people drag the CISO in. So.
And you got to have the leading indicators. So again, in today's world, your cyber risk is as big as the risk to all of your providers. And so when software companies put out their vulnerabilities, if the IT organization is not implementing the ones that are of high criticality right away, you are driving that risk throughout your entire organization. So being aware of the number of vulnerabilities that are being addressed, in what time frame, how many of what category of criticality all the way down to low exist. I think all of those are KPIs that you got to make sure have been established, and again, having the education of understanding which ones matter, and continuously, and certainly, as Bruce is saying, absolutely on a quarterly basis, you want to be looking at some of those KPIs and seeing what the company is doing to drive those down and really adhere to the best disciplines that need to exist.
So a question came in from one of our attendees about preparing for an unexpected activist attack. And I think that is a very good topic to discuss, and I think folks would really appreciate your perspectives and historical experiences on that. So, Ellen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad I saw that came in, and I'm glad someone asked that. Um, so I have been involved and I think one has to expect the unexpected. And there are shops out there that are looking to get involved, and sometimes not for the most honorable reasons. So I think it's very important that your companies are looking at who's buying and selling their stock so that they have an understanding of whether or not there's an activist that's accumulating shares. And I've been on a board where we woke up one day and realized that there was an activist in the stock. And before the activist got particularly active, we decided to put in play a process to determine our strategic future. The other things that I've seen happen is where the activists want to meet with the board. They often start with wanting to meet with the CEO, but also with the board. And sadly, I've had the experience where what they come and tell the board isn't true. So what they may say is that we have no desire to be disruptive. We only think we have some good ideas. We're large shareholders at this point, and we want to be helpful. And it wasn't true. So their agenda really was to replace a lot of members of the board and take it over and fire the CEO and do some of the things that we hear about this. So I think we have to be awake and we have to watch the stock. We have to understand when the trades are getting different and that there is the possibility that someone is accumulating stock. The other issue I would reinforce is sometimes the smaller, newer startup hedge funds or activists tend to be more difficult to deal with than the big bad ones that we all hear about, because the young, smaller ones have something to prove, and they will do something draconian that could really affect the future of the company because they are looking to raise money from other places. So even if it's a shop, an activist, a company, a hedge fund that you haven't heard of, do not disregard it, because anyone who's accumulating stock in your company you need to understand why. And this is where we cycle back to why it's very good to develop relationships with shareholders, with analysts during the good times. Because when you are going to have to rebut something that some other organization is saying about you, it's not easy, it's defensive, and it doesn't feel good. So it's very, very important to have the best relationship you can possibly have so that when you can say something isn't true, that it's believed. So all I can say is that legitimate activists often add value because they can really give you good ideas. They can help put good people on the board. And like anything else in life, there are good ones and there are bad ones. And when there are bad ones, they can be utterly destructive to a company. I've looked at the stock constantly of the one company where I was very involved, and the stock's gone nowhere, absolutely nowhere over a couple of years. And therefore, one has to be skeptical and not necessarily believe, but be proactive in thinking about who is in that stock and what their goals and objectives are, because what they say may not be the real agenda.
Mhm. And if I could add anything, Ellen mentioned being proactive. So there's the scenario she described, and then there's a different scenario where it's happening. And so now you've got to go do something. And so I consider myself fortunate to have had an opportunity to be involved in the initial conversations, and because I learned a lot. Um, you definitely have to be proactive, and you have to act fast. You can't, you know, say not now, we don't have time, because it's very emotional, it's very public, out there when you're dealing with an activist. But you've got to act quickly in engaging them. Obviously, you want to be armed with what you need, but putting it off makes it a lot worse, and they're not going away. And so you're going to have to be willing to engage as a board member and as a board, obviously with a collective message. But I learned a ton being to either fellow board members who are out there. Don't shy away from that if you have an opportunity to be a part of it, just because you're going to learn a lot. And to Ellen's other point, there may be some things that are recommended to you that actually make the company better. Vice, just the emotion that you're dealing with, and it's very public, it's in the headlines, and this is a company that you really, really care about, but you got to engage, is my point.
Motion?
I actually don't have anything to add. I think I learned a lot from both Ellen and Bruce, and hopefully if I'm ever in such a situation, I can leverage some of these learnings.
Call Bruce or Ellen, right?
Just
So
hopefully you won't be in that situation.
having to choose between the FBI and the
Yeah.
AG in Massachusetts. But if you are, call Beth Boland. There you go.
Yeah, trust me, that's right.
All right, so I want to ask this final wrap-up question, and this is the so-called money question for all of you. Can you provide 3 practical brief takeaways that people can write down and take back to their boards on how they can be better prepared for the unexpected, and how they can better respond to the unexpected?
I'll start. So I'll start because otherwise all of the great answers will be taken by some incredible partners. So, one is again, back to the practice for chaos. Do not ever assume that you're going to be composed under stress, and try to make those practices as realistic and messy as possible. And then back to the culture, reward early warnings. Again, create a culture where you're modeling how it is to be applauded for surfacing risk early, not blamed for, problems that usually aren't caused necessarily by the people bringing you the information. And then, again, it's about defining your resilience model ahead, build your crisis framework ahead of time. You cannot build it during the crisis, and then make sure that the board's oversight and resources are aligned to governing what you're defining, and making sure that it's not, that it's defined and that your practices show that that's the case.
Good start. That's
Yeah.
that's great. I'd say to your point, Mojan, that you said practice for chaos, and I would say expect the unexpected, which is similar. And we just have to expect the unexpected and not get freaked out by it. It's part of doing business today. And it's not personal, although in the case of activists, sometimes they try to make it personal. But this is business, and we have to expect the unexpected, and that's part of our job. I'd say the second is to insist on timely and full transparency, so that the management team understands that you want to put your head on a pillow at night and know that you didn't have to be smart enough to think of the one additional question to ask, that the teams are telling you everything you need to know and doing it proactively. And the third one is communicate, communicate, communicate. There just is not Over communication is not a problem in these kinds of situations because people want to be informed. They don't want to get stopped in the street and not know an answer to something they need. And there's no such thing as too much communication in these kinds of situations.
Great.
I would add, so understand the competitive landscape of the business of the company. There's almost no substitute for that because what it's going to do, I'd say, other than a strong board culture, which we spent a lot of time talking about, that's super important and it affects all other things. It's kind of the Uber recommendation. Make sure you've got a good understanding of the competitive landscape, which includes the risk of the company. Because what it'll do, if you do have a good board culture, you're going to be able to do this last thing, a good board culture, which is, I mentioned spending 70, 80, most of your time on the future, vice the current, because the current is so cool and so interesting, especially when you're new to a board and you're starting to really understand the business. And if you're not careful, I kind of draw a dotted line, and it's dotted for a reason, because you do want to get out and see the company. You do want to get to know the management team and know things about them. But you got to remember why you're there as a board. And there are a lot of things that are kind of going against the grain when it comes to getting, taking your attention away from what you're really there for is the future of the company. Absolutely, the company has to perform. That's a given. Okay, you get some other problems if that's not happening. But to this idea of managing crisis and handling crisis, I'd say make sure that you're focusing your attention on what we'll call the future. I know that means many things to many people. And then the last point as a takeaway, if this is the last thing we're going to say, get to know your fellow board members on a personal level. I was on a board during COVID, and it was an awesome board. But because we never got to meet in person, because every time we got ready to meet, someone got COVID. So it was a different experience. And it was a very, very large board, but it was a different experience than what I get now, where we get an opportunity to meet in person and we know things about each other's families and grandkids and, my Steelers not winning like they ought to be. And I'm over it, by the way. But just don't forget to do that. Get to know your fellow board members, because again, you're going to spend a lot of time together.
So the next favorite part of our program is featuring Deb Rosenthal. She loves this part. Deb, any questions in the queue that we should have our experts weigh in on?
We have a couple minutes. I think we should go back to culture, which weighed in heavily at the start of the conversation. And one of the questions is, how is your board safeguarding against a strong, healthy culture at a time when DEI efforts are being rolled back and expectations around diverse perspectives are shifting?
That's a great question.
It's a great question.
Every substantive board I'm involved with is able to separate the political aspects of what's happening on this rollback from who the company is.
Yes.
And they have a conversation quite honestly and openly about how we are not going to change who we are. And we may talk about it differently just because we don't want to waste our time and resources for the political side of this in order to maintain who we are as a company. So the honesty is absolutely the best way to handle this and to lay it all out there. But for the organizations to overtly talk about who we are and what our values are, and that's not going to change, versus how we talk about it.
The only other addition I'd say is be authentic in taking care of people inside your companies. And spend less time on what you call it and focus more on what you're actually doing. This conversation, and it's a great question, I'm not sure who asked it, it's happening in every boardroom. It's happening inside every management team, with employer resource groups, et cetera, et cetera. And where I land on it when it comes my turn to talk Just be authentic in taking care of people, showing genuine care and concern. If they believe that you're authentic, that you genuinely care about them, they're not going to be focused on what you're calling it. They're going to be focused on the deliverable and the outcomes that you're delivering for them as employees in the company.
Yeah, make sure you're listening. And again, I think many times people want to have the safety to be able to at least ask the questions and ask why. And so again, communication and transparency. If you do decide, like I love the fact of like, yeah, absolutely, it's about separating yourself from the political and focusing on the core of it, as both my counterparts are saying, but then making sure you provide the forums where people can ask questions and really explaining the why, because most times if people know why you're doing something that you did, they're much more understanding and they feel heard and they feel valued as opposed to not.
Great. Deb, are there others?
We have one question that we could ask. We don't have much time, but if someone wants to share with us, one of our members would love to hear about a time when you've been brought onto the board to affect change.
I'm dealing with one right now, in the United Kingdom, actually, where most of the board members are investors, original investors in this company. And the only independent director was the board chair. And he is someone I knew from my work, my own career, and asked for me to come on as another independent, because the feeling was, as sophisticated and wealthy as the other board members were, they don't know a lot about good governance. And the chair really felt that was important. And it's one thing for all of us to get ourselves educated about good governance. It's another thing when the other members of the board really don't care. So it takes a lot of hand-holding, a lot of process. And we all tend to be outcome oriented. And when you're dealing in a situation like this, it's really more about how we deal with the process of getting people to understand the values of good governance. So it's not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you that it's a lot of work.
So, Deb, are we ready for me to turn it over to Kevin?
We are.
All right. Well, I'd like to introduce the one and only president of the NACD New England chapter, Kevin McGovern, to take us home.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for attending today. Can we have a virtual round of applause for our moderator, Steve Barth, also to Bruce, Mojgan, and Ellen for their terrific examples and insights today. I took a couple of notes. What we heard about today. First of all, the importance of a culture of discipline and trust at the board, the need to practice as a means of preparation, building relationships during the good times so that you can make those phone calls during the necessary times, not waiting when something bad happens or something is happening and looking for the right signals to understand that something is happening and that you have to jump into the middle of things sometimes, not knowing the answer. And then finally, perhaps the quote of the day by Bruce. Your audio and your video have to match. I love that. I'm going to keep that with me, Bruce. So thank you. Just as a sign of the power and the reach of NACD, and not just NACD New England and the DC chapter or Friends from DC. Shepherd, thank you for your partnership. We had over 100 attendees today from 18 states plus the District of Columbia, and from Canada and the country of Colombia. So that it's amazing how much and the sharing and the availability of information and stuff. So just wanted to note that for all of you that we really are reaching a wide community here. So I have a few quick announcements before I let you go on your way. Larissa, if you could please put up the couple of slides here. For both the capital area and the New England chapter, we are very active chapters. Many of you know that. You join us for many of these calls, both virtual and in person. But you can see the upcoming events that we have. Please join us for as many of these as you possibly can. We would appreciate your attendance and always love the opportunity to share insights with all of you. Secondly, in the New England chapter, there are two initiatives that we would draw your attention to. First of all, you can see on the left side of the screen a QR code. We are asking for your input into a survey that we're doing regarding governing for the future. And we're using this to understand where we should be focusing our efforts going forward from a programming perspective, and are really looking for your insights there. But secondly, we're very excited to announce an inaugural partnership with the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, a symposium on global uncertainty in the 21st century. If you click on the code there, you'll see we're having a full day retreat at the Fletcher School in March of next year. And the faculty are all the senior faculty of the Fletcher School, and we're looking for a very robust group of attendees who are dealing with global challenges because their organizations have a global reach and a global perspective. And then finally, as we close all of our events, in person or virtual, we ask for your feedback. The QR code here, if you click on it, will bring you to the survey. We read every single survey that we get. You will also be getting a follow-up email today, which will include an opportunity for you to complete an online survey. There'll be a link in the email. So please, one way or the other, give us your feedback. We truly do value that and take it into consideration. So thank you for that. And then finally, Shepard, if you want to come back on the screen, I know you have one more announcement before we let you all go. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So as many of you may have heard, there is a new NACD ambassador program for people who are available to chat about the NACD certification. If you've been thinking about doing it, you're welcome to reach out to me or any of the other 50 ambassadors. We don't get a penny from it. We've gone through it. And we're happy to share our experience. And I would want to, I know a lot of you already have your certification. Do encourage you to think about it if you haven't. There is a pretty significant discount in November. I guess this is certification month. So if you're thinking about it and we're wondering maybe to do it next year, it's about $1,000. I think it's $9.99 off. So it's a pretty significant reduction if you haven't pulled the trigger on doing it and you're thinking you might. Go ahead and do that. So happy to share my experience, and pretty much anyone else I think who has done the certification would be happy to share that. And there will be information in the follow-up email. So again, thank you everyone for attending. Great questions, really appreciate. And to the panelists and Steve, thank you so much for leading us today. Have a great day.